The Chartered Institute of Taxation in Nigeria hosted its 2019 Federal Government Budget Workshop in Lagos. Focusing on the theme, Accelerating Growth for Economic and Social Transformation, it was an opportunity for stakeholders to discuss the budget and the implications for the economy. It featured a presentation on fiscal projections of the 2019 budget, challenges and prospects, with Mr. Olufemi Awoyemi, CEO of Proshare, emphasizing on the need to invest in education, which will drive productivity.
You will need to therefore educate the people to make them what? Productive. Listen, you would educate them to make them what? Productive. A productive people, therefore, to make them productive, you have to make them what? Healthy, secured, in accommodation, and then they would have to feed. The Maslow's principle is already taken care of immediately just by doing what? Focusing on what? Productivity. That's the purpose of education. Productivity is the purpose of education. When they are therefore productive, you can therefore go to the level of policy, both fiscal and monetary, to guide the environment in which they are working. When they do this, they can earn for themselves either as individuals or as entities in a company. And ultimately do what? Pay taxation. And so that is the whole loop. Now what Awolowo therefore did was to understand at that stage that the low level of thinking, education was there. They decided to pay it what? Forward. It wasn't free. It was an investment. If you look at the structure, therefore, they now define the structure of the education. They have technical college for those who may not, who have affinity for something, you can be doing technical. The other ones in vocation. Those who like to teach, you go here. Those who like to talk like myself, you go do law or some other things like that. Those who want to study will be there. The exceptional ones we give scholarship to. And they ensure that we can therefore build up what? A society that will raise the game. You know, it was equated to, but what it did was to lift up the society from the ground floor up. Now, what we've done is to sustain that, but we will only sustain quantity, not the quality that was there before. And as such, you would then say that the whole loop is this. And I learned this a little bit easier because you keep on talking about Rwanda, keep on talking about Ethiopia. When they ask them, how did you lift your society up? They answered a single question. We do not have oil, so we had to think. When government is faced with very difficult position, trust government to take the silliest position. And it has happened. Governments do not create value per se. They create an enabling environment. There is a classic body of knowledge that government fails in business. Government has no business in using taxpayers' money to fund business. It is people, entrepreneurs who take risks to fund business. And that's wherein the whole challenge lies. The one thing you fund is you fund education.
Mr. Yomi Olugbenro, head tax for Deloitte West Africa, gave his own perspective on the 2019 budget, taxation, and nation's revenue plan.
How realistic the budget is. So, first of all, when Mr. President presented the budget, like expected, he mentioned that the budget was meant to further, entrench the effort the government is making and implementing the economic recovery and growth plan. The ERGP stands on a number of fundamental assumptions, or tripod, if you like. We wanted to restore growth. We want the development of the growth to become a lot more inclusive. That's what the ERGP says. And then the third one is around building a globally competitive economy by investing in critical infrastructure. Now, look at that expectation and the policy trust, and look at the budget. If you want to grow the economy and you want to invest in critical infrastructure, and that's what you really want to deliver, you can't be budgeting the amount you budgeted for capital expenditure in that budget. It's just not going to work. That budget is not going to deliver the growth that we're looking for. We narrowly escape recession, but the economy is still fledgling. The economy is still very weak. Any little misstep in continuing the trajectory of investing a lot more and making sure that the economy remains reflated, we may just slip back. And that recovery is built fundamentally on oil price recovery. If anything happens as it may, there's a lot of worry. So if you look at the policy trust and what we budgeted, you realize that there's a little bit of disconnect. But there's even a lot more reason to worry. And that for me is probably the trust of what I pick away from what it's saying and the budget. We may end up having this 2019 budget as presented and ended up just effectively servicing our debt and paying our recurrent expenditure and having nothing left or no time to do anything on infrastructure. The total revenue that is budgeted, if all assumptions are right, oil revenue target met, non-oil revenue target met, 100%, is 6.97 trillion. If you look at how much we budgeted to spend on servicing debt, including sinking fund, how much we budgeted for recurrent expenditure, and how much we budgeted for statutory transfer, it totaled 6.8 trillion. Our revenue, 6.97. Take away capital expenditure, everything recurrent, service debt, pay salary, pay overhead, transfer to statutory bodies like INEC, like National Assembly, like the judiciary, is 6.8 trillion approximately. So the total of the income will go to everything but capital. That is why the total capital vote, the total capital expenditure is exactly the total borrowing. 2.03 or 2 trillion is the capital expenditure. Borrowing is about 2 trillion, 1.95 or 1.85 or thereabouts. So, if you judge by, that's concern number one, judge by the trajectory of budget approval cycle over the last 2-3 years. And maybe probably just look at the last year. That budget got passed midway into half of the year, so maybe about just before we ended June. Now, that was pre-election year. The stakes are higher this year. It's an election year. Irrespective of how this thing goes, there's a likelihood. I do not see anything to convince me that we are likely going to approve that budget anytime faster than we did last year. Meaning, it will be after transition.
Dr. Abiodun Adedipe, an economist, speaks further on the 2019 FGN budget workshop and the economy.
Now, the first thing that gives a worry when it comes to capital budget implementation is when the bill becomes law. And that has been our experience in the last 3 to 4 years. Usually, budget gets passed and then signed into law mid-year. That immediately tells you that you have only 6 months left in the year to execute it. But we also know that the way economic activities work in Nigeria, you can't talk about execution fully in December. So you can then say effectively you have only 5 months to implement a budget meant for a whole year. But that is only by the way, because the critical thing here is that the next budget will not kick in until it is passed into law. So if we look at it legally, therefore, the date it is passed into law will not really matter, because that budget still gets implemented until a new one is signed into law. That is when it gets rested. So that said, the critical thing here now is therefore that one, the choice of projects, and then the execution in terms of what I call value for money. Now, when we establish those two, then we can begin to talk about how it is funded. Okay, I have no problem as an economist borrowing to execute infrastructure projects. And it is very simple. Infrastructure projects are enablers. Enablers in the sense that when the roads are good, when you can move people and goods through the railway, and of course, there is what we call intermodal transportation in most of your urban areas. And by the way, more Nigerians are now living in urban areas, more than it used to be. That means we have to worry about infrastructure in our urban areas. Now, if we invest in this, it means, for example, I spend less time commuting than I spend at work. If I spend more hours at work than I spend commuting, that means I can produce a lot more. If I produce more, my employer also makes more money. My employer is able to pay more tax anyway. And so all of these things tie together. So but the critical thing here now is that if I have to borrow money to fund infrastructure, for me, there is no problem with that, insofar as we get value for money. I've also taken time to look at this, that when you talk about countries that have first-class infrastructure globally, and you look at these same countries, whether they owe money or not, you discover that they are the countries that owe the most. So I can then see a very strong correlation between borrowing and then the quality of infrastructure you have. So if government borrows more to build infrastructure, I am all for it. But what is not productive economically is for government to borrow to fund recurrent spending.
A major takeaway from the CITN 2019 FGN budget workshop is the need for Nigeria to give top priority to investment in human capital development, most especially the education sector.